Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy McKinnon, and I'm a narrative therapist from Kamloops, British Columbia in Canada. My practice focus is on trauma work, narrative therapy, trauma work, mental health, and addictions. And I'm also an instructor at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, and I teach in the Faculty of Social Work, the School of Social Work, the Faculty of Education and Social Work. I'm also the acting education coordinator for the social work department. I'd like to acknowledge that currently we are situated on the traditional and unceded lands of Tecumloops, the Secwepemc, within the traditional territory of the Secwepemc people. Thank you, Stephen Gaddis, for creating the incredible wave that you've created. It's a real beautiful tribute to living inquiry. Um, I'm here today because I'd like to delightfully introduce you to one of the most beautiful narrative therapists I know, and her name is Charnel Matthews. Charnel,
Hello, how are you?
hi. Great.
Hi,
I'm
Chanel.
hoping you can share a bit of your story.
Well, I came prepared for my tea. I don't see everybody else has their tea.
Yeah, it's like, woo.
Okay, my name is Charnel Matthews. Um, I'm an Aboriginal mental health clinician. I've come from some very important people in the Secwepemc Nation. My mom is from Adams Lake. And if you kind of give an idea of the territory, there's about 17 communities. I'm related really closely to 7. So when we talk about connectedness in Aboriginal communities, family and connectedness and identity are really important. So I've been practicing for about 20 years. I started, oh, Kathy, are you having a hard time hearing?
No, I can hear.
Oh, the other Kathy, I
Oh,
was,
the other Kathy.
okay. So my focus is working with Aboriginal populations, and it is a passion of mine. And I think it has a lot to do with historically of the past. My mother attended the residential school, and both my grandparents and great grandparents on both sides. So for me, it's always been a passion because I've understood the plight and the legacy of Aboriginal people in Canada. So that's one of my very heartfelt why I'm in the profession that I am. And I wanted to talk about what drives my practice and who I am as a practitioner. We have this saying, and when I talk with people who work with Aboriginal peoples, one of the important things that I talk about is we have a saying called all my relations. And one of the reasons I think it's really important when you work with Aboriginal populations, when we say all our relations, you think about all the grandparents, all the great parents, the aunts, the uncles, the siblings, etc., that sit alongside people when they walk into the office. And I guess for me, you don't just work with the individual, yeah, you work with the family, the extended family, and the relatives living who have passed before. And I think importantly for myself, we need to identify the pain and suffering of the past. However, for me, what's really important is to pull out the beautiful values and traditions that are there. And they exist, the powerful narratives of hope, love, and laughter, and the beautiful values and code of ethics of family that were not completely destroyed by colonization. And I think that's kind of, for me, the important aspects of why I do the work is really working on that pain and suffering because of my own personal experience. I understand that quite significantly as I grew up on a small reserve outside of Kamloops, which is an hour. Living on reserve is much, much different than living in a city in urban Canada. And so my experiences as a child, you know, that aids me in practice. I've witnessed child abuse or family violence from a small child until I was about 17 at every level. And I only sought out counseling twice. in my adolescence, and both times were very traumatic. They would talk about all the failings that I was doing that. And I think when you're suffering, you already know that because you already annihilate yourself mentally. And so those are one of the things that I took away with that I wanted to be a different practitioner. I wanted to instill love, kindness, forgiveness, and I guess for me, that personal part of kindness. Um, and I guess for me, love and kindness are really important when you understand Aboriginal experience through the residential school, that many, many children were taken away from young till they were, 17, 18, and they didn't have the parenting skills and they didn't have that love and kindness. And so it's really important when we work with Aboriginal populations to understand the history, but also the environment that we create when working with Aboriginal populations, because their experiences is very distinct and the needs are very unique. I wrote a couple notes just in case I got a little lost here. I guess for me, I didn't want people to suffer and have that pain and feeling lost, because I finally felt like I was 29, where like a puzzle, I started putting all those pieces of myself back. So that's really instrumental for me, is not wanting to people to suffer as long as I did to, and that's what strived me to work in the school district for 15 years, is because that's where I initially struggled. And I wanted to be part of that process of change with working with individuals, families, and communities. That was really important for me. And I think for me, a big realization, because I had a really long, hard struggling, is that I mattered as being an Aboriginal person. It was a gift and not a burden. Racism, discrimination, and colonization once shaped me into a negative light. However, now it's what motivates me and my passion to continually grow, so I can be part of the healing as a human being and a practitioner. And it is an honor to walk beside the people who come into my office and say, I want different and I want to love myself. My experience has aided me in working with Aboriginal population. And for me, I think the biggest thing is we are part of the process. And for me, I work with 7 communities. I am part of individuals, families, and communities. I'm not separate. I'm a part of that. And I'm always really, really important of that. And I know that I'm instrumental in the part of a catalyst. So I really have to look after myself. And part of that is loving myself and looking after myself so I can be there for the families and communities I work with. So for me, I love narrative therapy. It is such a passion because it is something that as Aboriginal people, we are storytellers. And it is a gift for me to all the beautiful stories I've heard working in the school district, and be able to have this opportunity. So thank you very much. Working with Aboriginal people is such a gift. That piece, you talk about confidentiality in a huge city. Well, it's really interesting when you work in a small town, and Aboriginal people, they love you. They're part of their family. You'll be in a mall and someone will be like, there's my counselor, and everybody will run, to you and hug you. And, they're proud to say they work. So I really do like working in a small community, but I really love working with Aboriginal people because we are all one, and that healing journey just doesn't begin with them. It begins with yourself, because you learn from one another in those beautiful sharings of stories. So I thank you. I love my work. I've always said when I don't feel, it's time for me to get out. And, I've been doing this for 20 years and I still have that same sort of, my heart feels full when I work with people. So, I know there's still a long journey to go with narrative therapy. And I thank you so much for this opportunity to talk and have a tea with people. Cook's Gem.
Thanks so much, Charnel. I'm always in your, I'm always in awe of your story of such relational and compassionate practice. I have a curious question. I'm just looking at the notes I made. Given the abrupt relationship with COVID-19 that's been afflicted upon the planet over the past 2 months, and your memories and experience over the past few months, who will you now be as a therapist to all the Aboriginal people, families, and communities who you walk beside from here on in?
I think for me, the biggest one, I would really work with families on preparing them for such things as natural disasters, a pandemic. For Aboriginal communities, the loss of family was significant because, in British Columbia, they were telling people you couldn't gather more than, 10 people. Some of our families, and we're talking immediate families, not extended, are 20. And so for me to be able to, instill having strategies for families so they have better coping skills for something so significant. We dealt with a lot of depression. There was a lot of shame and guilt in our culture when someone passes, because we're so connected, like the 7 surrounding communities, it's all like one. There's been a few funerals, and it's been really devastating for families, that shame and guilt for not being able to physically be there and attend. And that's been devastating. And I guess another thing for me is I would do a lot of advocating. A lot of our remote communities don't have internet and they don't have cell. And I can't even begin to imagine what that would be like, because I have the luxury of, I don't see my mom because she's elderly. I don't want to, have that piece where I could give her, the virus is, I can FaceTime her. It's still really hard on Mother's Day. I felt that was a really hard day. I felt lost. So I cannot imagine for the big families that are huge, that are always used to being with each other, what that loneliness and loss. So I think better preparation for my families and working with them to give them coping skills for things like natural disasters and pandemic. That definitely would be something at the top of my practice.
Thanks, Charnel. I'm just curious, Kathy, Dave, Stephen, and Stephen, any reflections or curious thoughts for Charnel?
I have a reflection. I really identified with your being drawn back to your community and working with your community. For many years, I didn't work with an LGBT community, but identifying as gay myself, it was really important to me when I had the opportunity to work as a therapist to work with my community. So it touched me when you were talking about that. And it's a very different community, probably. But still, it was quite impactful to me. It immediately took me to an image of lots of people being together, being in each other's space, which is so difficult right now.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Charnel, I'm sorry that I missed the beginnings of yours and that I was having technical issues, but I've heard much about you from Kathy and how much she respects you and cares for you. And so I look forward to seeing the video.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll pass it over to Kathy.
Okay, so I put my notes, Dave, earlier in the chat. I don't know if you saw them. But basically I explained how I met you 3 years ago at Craft in America's show with Kazuki and Ellen Sachs, who's on your board. And I've been very drawn to Pain and Brave community work and have loved getting to know more about and meeting Pain and Brain's community contributors. And I was wondering if you'd like to tell us about the work of Painted Brain and the ways that your community has been impacted by COVID-19. Dave, can you hear us? You have to unmute. I'm thinking that Stephen Gaddis, Dave Leon may need a new entry email.
Okay.
Yeah, froze there.
Can you shift to the other conversation and then I'll work on trying to get Dave back?
Stephen and Stephen.
Yeah.
Thanks.
This is really flying by the seat of your pants.
Yes, we are.
I'm sorry about the technical difficulties.
It happens.
It's okay. I'm sure we can roll with it. Well, I'm very pleased to be here and grateful to have been invited by my good friend, Kathy Adams. And I've enjoyed talking about the prospect of this, both with Kathy Adams and Kathy McKinnon. So it's great to see you both on the screen. And great to meet Chanel. So I'm an MFT working in Los Angeles, mainly in private practice. I have a role in my LGBT community. Most of my clients identify as LGBT, not all, but most. But I'm here to introduce my husband, Stephen Byrne, who I have known for 35 years. When we met, I wasn't doing this kind of work and neither was he doing what he's doing now. But he's the love of my life. And for the last 2 or 3 months, my main contact with the outside world, because I've been isolated by COVID-19, like many people in their 60s. It's not been safe for me to go to places. And so Stephen took it upon himself to be my connection with the world. Along with doing a very busy job, he goes regularly to the store and cooks up a storm. And that's something that we've both benefited from, but he's the main chef. And why I wanted to give him the opportunity to speak to you guys was that he, in the course of his work, has been able to use his passion for food and cooking in a very creative way. So there's the story I'm expecting him to tell is about this idea here in Los Angeles called the Pride Pantry. So without further ado, over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Loon, and hello everyone. Probably the least.
Hey, Loon, you have to speak up.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me now?
You have to get close to the computer, I think.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just give me 1 second. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation to participate in something that until now has only ever seemed like the kind of thing that takes my husband away from me. I don't know anything at all or very little about narrative therapy, and it's been fascinating dipping in and out over the last few hours to hear what people have had to say. And it really is just about storytelling and sharing information with folks. And I came on here well prepared, I think, to talk about the Pride Pantry and the thing I was briefed to talk about. But I've been distracted whilst sitting here listening to other people tell their stories and hearing Chanel talking about family and what that means to her has prompted thoughts of family to me. And it's Memorial Day, obviously, on Monday, 25th of May, and it also happens to be the anniversary of when my dad died 14 years ago on the 25th of May. And it made me realize that he just exists as a memory. That's all I have of him now, and all that people that knew him who know me have of him as just some sense of memory to share. And as we get older, I get frightened about what it means to have memory and a sense of what that is, and to be around loved ones who are at risk of losing their memory and losing their sense of self and not really understanding how to deal with that. And I know I didn't come on this call to talk about that, but that's candidly what was at the forefront of my mind, having listened to Chanel, who I've never seen or spoken to before, but she just managed to tap into something. Maybe I was primed, I don't know. But anyway, back to Pride Pantry if I can. The inspiration really for it is sitting in another part of this house, and that's my husband, Stephen. He has been a carer. He's always looked after people more than he's looked after himself, to the point of distraction sometimes. He used to be a medical doctor back in England, and 35 years ago when we met, we were living through another kind of pandemic, really, although it wasn't called that then, which was when HIV came on the scene, and we both thought personally we were at risk, but nobody knew how you caught it and what you should and shouldn't do and how you should and shouldn't behave. But at no time did Stephen hesitate. And we were both involved in very small ways with AIDS activism, but he was involved in real ways with caring for people who had what became known as HIV and was HTLV3 at one point, whatever that was. And he was inspirational, really. And I've been the selfish one in our who was focused on earning money, doing the kind of corporate job. And he's always cared about people. I've been misanthropic, really, more than anything else. He's always been much more social. And it was when COVID-19 hit, it was thinking about him and the fact that he was stranded here that made me think that I should do something different. Instead of just getting angry and being fucked off at what's happening nationally at a political level, I just felt compelled to try and, in my own little bubble, do something to help make a difference. And I work at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. Most of you won't know what that is, but it's an incredible organization that employs about 800 people and cares for and looks after around about typically 50,000 folks a month would come and interact with us. Lots of them get healthcare, lots of them get legal services. They're dealing with immigration issues or domestic violence issues. Some come for social contact and even just to play bingo and do yoga or whatever. But there's a real sense of community around the place. And I had a background of working for a multinational company that turned over billions of dollars and was very successful and was doing very well and was good at making money, but wasn't fulfilled. And I joined the center as a volunteer about 7 years ago, I think, something like that now. Helped it build a new center. I was involved, played a role in building this project that became known as the campus. And it's the heart of our organization now. It's a physical building, but it means so much more because we spent years pulling together to try and build this thing and create it. It was just built, it became our home. We were very proud of it. It even won architectural awards. I mean, it really is an amazing thing. And then this pandemic hit, and suddenly all the life and heart and soul with all the people and the voices that you heard in the building every day of the week were gone. Staff were having to work from home. Clients were too scared to come in. I was going to work every day, but not really sure what I was doing. And we carried on with a separate building, which is where we've got our health clinic. We saw people there, but increasingly people were switching to telehealth work, and we were having to work with clients in a different way. But still we had this, what became a big white elephant of a building in a way. And at its heart is something called Pride Hall. It's an enormous space. It's got a triple heighted ceiling, and it was meant to be for big events so we could raise funds and throw parties and have meetings and give prize givings and do all sorts of things there. But it wasn't being used. It was just sitting empty. And it seemed a complete waste to me. It was air conditioned. It opened up to the world as well. It was easily accessible, but it was like the jewel in our campus that was just tarnished because there was nobody in it. There were no people in it. So exactly a month ago today, on the 23rd of April, I had contact with the board and people that run the organization to try and say, what can we do with this big space that we've got? And they said, well, if you can come up with something, you can have it and you could use it. So it seemed to me that what was missing from our organization was I was watching on television and seeing that other communities were getting together and actively distributing food to people. And we didn't really do that. We provide housing for 100 seniors live in affordable housing. We house about 125 youth, and we feed them regularly, but there's a gap in that we didn't do anything for people in the middle in a way. And so I had this idea that it might be good to use Pride Hall and come up with this concept of something called Pride Pantry and see if we could tap into resources and find food sources that would allow us to feed people who are going through food insecurity, some of whom had never experienced it before because they'd never been unemployed before. They'd had good jobs and a good income and they thought they were set for life. But as Bernie Sanders kept saying lots of people in America are only one paycheck away from hunger and starvation. And boy, do I know that now, and I didn't then. So anyway, I was given the go-ahead by the people I work with to see if you could put something together. They talked about, would I take a leadership role and set up a committee? They're two concepts that just bring me out in hives, basically. I hate the concept of leadership and everything that involves. Don't like the term and don't like the hierarchical structure that goes with it. And the idea of a committee just simply terrifies me, because I've spent years in meetings with what were glorified committees, realizing that you could never get anything done. But anyway, what happened was we just put people together from across the organization. I put an appeal out to people I work with to see if anybody would step up to help, and was just inundated with responses from people who were otherwise working at home and still having to do their day-to-day job, but they wanted to take extra time because they thought this was something that was worth doing. We scratched and scraped and looked around to see if we could find food sources, because none of us had any idea of how to go about doing that. And to cut a really fairly long-winded story short, we found the food. We found enormous quantities of food from people who are just wanting to help. So at a corporate level, we never imagined an organization like ours would get support from people like American Airlines and Trader Joe's, which is a supermarket chain here in California, but they've stepped up and they're offering food. Much of it is stuff that should have been eaten and would go to waste otherwise. So we've had an abundance of mozzarella cheese sticks with salami wraps and pretzels and the kind of thing that you get when you fly with American Airlines, I guess. We have an abundance of jarred pickles and canned tuna that we've been getting from Trader Joe's, but we set up something with an organization called Chefs to End Hunger, who provided us with a fresh food supply. So we're now getting vegetables and dairy, all sorts of things that we never imagined, as well as loads of dried goods, beans, rice, dried pasta. And in less than a month, we've been able to put something together which is like a little bit of a military operation, really. And we're able now to provide 500 food parcels a week for people, and there's a week's worth of groceries in that. And it's now going out to members of the LGBT community, yes, but we've never turned anybody away. And we've just reached out to our own clients to ask if any of them needed this stuff and could we provide it for them. And it's just been fantastic to see the response that we've had. The things that you assume people want, they sometimes don't want. And I love the fact that they're kind of ballsy enough to say, well, I really appreciate that jar of peanut butter that you sent, but couldn't we have some masa flour? I didn't even know what that was, by the way, until somebody asked for it. But now that I do, and we've been sort of just able to tap into a spirit from folks that we didn't imagine. And it's led to other things. So when we've been giving food out, for example, to the seniors who live in one of our residential buildings, they've then been exchanging it for other things that other people have. And they've created their own little bartering system based on the food that we've been able to provide them with. And yesterday was the first day I'd actually seen things close up and firsthand where they were coming to us. I'd been involved in delivering food to other locations and not really seeing people pick it up. But the humbling experience, really, of watching people come, take what it is that you're offering them and then take it away and I presume using it, has just been fantastic. And one of the things that was really poignant yesterday, which was I didn't expect it to be, is that somebody drew up to the building where I was in a kind of flash and fancy car and took the food parcel away with them, and off they went. And somebody I worked with was criticizing that person who looked like they had a fancy car and wouldn't need a food parcel. And they were told by somebody who knew them that it was a person who'd lost their job. They hadn't worked for 10 weeks. They did have a flash and fancy car that they couldn't afford to pay the loans on, and they didn't have any income source coming in at all. So, you know, in LA, everybody is very good at putting up appearances and making it look like maybe they're doing better than they really are. And flash and fancy cars here, I guess, are no indication really of what's going on in people's lives. But the thing that's just been fantastic for me, really, is that this old misanthrope has seen the power of human spirit, and people that I didn't think would step up at work, I thought that were selfish, they don't need to do this stuff. They've just volunteered in prodigious numbers, and we now know that we have enough food coming in to take us until the end of June, and enough volunteers and staff who've given their time or are giving their time between now and then to keep this thing going until the end of June. And we've had an offer from USDA, which is the federal government, I think, to, if we want to, carry on doing it until the end of December. And I don't know how long the COVID crisis is going to go on, but I suspect that food insecurity and hunger is going to go on well beyond that. So this started off as a small idea, hoping that we'd do something, and really just winging it to see how it went. And it's grown into what I think will be a program that will be sustainable for an awfully long time, and it will hopefully go on long past the period of the pandemic. So I just wanted to share that story with you. And the reason I did it in the first place really was because my gorgeous husband is stuck at home, and it's unlike him. He's normally the one to roll up his sleeves and to get involved and to do something. And I thought, I'm going to make him proud of me. I'm going to do something that'll have him say he made a difference. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm loving it.
Wow, Loon. Thank you so much for sharing that. Gosh, I hardly know where to begin, but what touches me about it is that you picked it up and run with it. I mean, I think back in my life, the reason that I so admire it is that I've often had really great ideas and done nothing with them. On occasions, someone like you can have a really great idea and really do something with them. And I think it takes a lot to do that. You know, there's a lot of politics behind this story that we haven't gone into. But I know that the only reason that this project is up and running is because of you and because you put this energy in. And I admire that enormously. Some of the other things that you said that's struck me is, you know, you refer to it as a military operation, and I can't imagine the centre as being anything less like a military organisation, but the idea that you've managed to get these very disparate and independently minded folk to work together in this way is you know, incredibly impressive. And the hope of it, the other thing that really touches me as the person who invited you to do this, is that the hope of what you're doing transcends the you know, the effort of doing it right now. If you're able to continue this, if you're able to facilitate people not having food insecurity and being able to survive through this pandemic, then that's an amazing achievement. I could say more. I find myself in the unusual position of not often praising you to third parties. And I think under the circumstances, I probably saved my blushes and definitely your blushes by stopping at this point and inviting Kathy and Dave and Charnel to contribute anything they would like to observe or reflect.
So Stephen Byrne, I became friends with you through your husband. And you have, I'm gonna cry. You've made it possible for me to not leave my home. So even though you say that you're not, that the other Stephen is caring of people, you are too, and of my dog. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to get the chance to pop round, and especially to see Marley, who I completely adore. You're incidental to all of that, Kathy, as I'm sure you know.
I'm very aware that I'm incidental to that.
Stephen, I really appreciate the memories you're creating for so many people and the differences you're making right now in people's lives, and the concept of hope and the human spirit. You just made it really big for me. Thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really powerful to hear you speak, Stephen. I appreciate your efforts and your intentions. And I've been so impressed with the LGBT Center over the years as a social worker here in LA. I've known about it since really since I moved here and started working in homeless youth services in Hollywood in 2000, and actually in the year 2000, 20 years ago. And I've seen the LGBT Center grow over the years, and long ago, ran art groups myself at the Jeff Griffith Center back when it was the thing. And yeah, just thank you for sharing your story. It's powerful.
You're very welcome. Jeff Griffith's name lives on now in a clinic in the so he doesn't have a center as such. I think he has a floor.
There's a floor.
His memory is still sharp, and people are grateful to him and his family for helping us do the kind of stuff that we do. But it's an amazing organization, as you say, and it does all sorts of things for different people. And what it never does is ask whether you're LGBT or T.
Right.
It's an assumption that if you come there, that you're kind of cool with the kids, really, and that nobody is bothered that much about your sexual orientation as long as you understand the core principles of who we are and why we operate. And I love that about it. I love the fact that with the food distribution that we're doing, you know, we wouldn't want food banks to discriminate against our community, and we don't want to discriminate against anybody else's either. It's been great.
Absolutely.
And we're just about to throw to Kathy and her introduction of Dave. But Chanel, was there anything you wanted to add? Just unmute. There you go.
Stephen, what a beautiful story. You know, you talked about your partner feeling proud. I feel proud as a human being. And when you talked, I thought about Gandhi, you know, one person who can create change. Very beautiful story, very powerful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Nobody's ever suggested that anything I've said or done reminds them of Gandhi. That's kind of amazing. I could fit about 10 Gandhis in me, I think. But
you need one piece of homespun.
So over to Kathy. Adams, I should say.
Hi. I don't know how many times you've now heard me introduce Dave Leon.
Sorry about that.
And I also put the introduction in the notes. But basically, I've known Dave Leon for 3 years. I met him because he was on a panel at Craft in America with Kazuki, who's a glass artist, and Ellen Sachs, who's on his board, on the Painted Brains board. And I've really enjoyed meeting the Painted Brain folks, and I love the community work that they're doing in LA. So I wanted to invite Dave Leon to be part of this, to tell us a bit about what they do and how COVID has impacted them.
Sure, thank you, Kathy, and thanks everyone. It's a pleasure to be with y'all. My Zoom crashes often, so if I do cut out, I'll just rejoin and try to be patient with me. Painted Brain is an organization that I started about 16 years ago. I was working in, really my first job as a social worker in public mental health at a place called D.V. Hirsch in Culver City, and was meeting a lot of young adults with what was diagnosed as pretty serious mental illness, schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and depression and things that are, I know, a little bit on the edge around narrative therapy. But I was working with a lot of these folks and trying to help them sort of figure out how to live and how to make sense of their worlds with the challenge of being a young adult and the challenge of also having what was considered a psychiatric illness and maybe losing contact with friends and their normal social networks. So I started this idea about bringing people together that had these qualities in common, really across cultures. I was really moved by what the talk about the Aborigines experiences. I think in LA, there is so many broken cultures and sort of injured cultures in LA from poverty and from history within the United States. And mental illness is one more additional challenge on that. And so it creates a sort of a mass of people that experience psychiatric challenges that might actually have more in common with each other than with their own communities, or might actually need a way to find each other. So the Painted Brain has basically always been about trying to create that opportunity for people with more serious psychiatric challenges to find each other through the arts and through technology and to socialize with each other. We've grown a lot over the years. We became a nonprofit just 3 years ago, even though we've been around for about 15 years. And at our most recent incarnation before COVID closed us down for the moment, we had a community center in the Mid-City area where we had probably about 60, 80 people come through a week. We had just started a new jobs program and had actually recruited some folks from the LGBT Center specifically. We had about 4 folks that were entering our jobs program through the LGBT outreach that we did to the center. And we ran about 24 groups a week at psychiatric facilities, housing sites, group homes, psychiatric hospitals. So all that came to a screeching halt pretty much on March 16th. And we moved what we could over to online services. We have some groups running online. We have our community meeting. We have some arts groups. We created a phone tree to stay in touch with the folks that were part of our community, working with our social work team, our OT team, and our interns and peers. And we're doing what we can to sort of stay afloat and stay as involved as possible and do what we can online. A lot of our group services are shut down in direct service because of the risks of becoming a spreader ourselves in visiting these places. But we have been able to move some of the groups online, and I run 4 groups myself actually, where I'm on a camera and I'm talking to a group of people that are in a room together, helping them do some fun art, listen to some music together, and try to socialize. So the Painted Brain has always been about trying to find ways to help people socialize better with each other. We work with people that are at sort of the lower end of the public health system, getting only public services, the limited housing services that are available. A lot of our folks are dealing with legal issues as well as psychiatric issues. And so we go into sites where Hey again, I'll just keep going. We go into sites where a lot of groups are living already. We've actually just been contacted by UCLA and DMH to do some art group activity on site at some of the shelters that have been built up in public parks here in Los Angeles. It's really a respite. We're not a primary service. We're sort of an adjunctive service to psychiatry and to case management. And we're really trying to focus on the social aspects. And so one opportunity we have now is to attend 5 public parks in Los Angeles that have become emergency shelters for folks that were recently on the street. And we're going to be doing a weekly art group at those sites. And we're going to be providing art kits to about 400 additional folks who are actually on quarantine in public sites as well. So our work has always been about sort of the public mental health services and public health aspects of mental health. I also work as a therapist on the side as well, and I would be happy to talk about that too. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions or expand on anything.
Thanks, Dave, for sharing about Painted Brain. And I'm wondering if Stephen, Kathy, or Chanel have any questions for you. No questions?
I'm curious to know, Dave, how people have been responding in the communities that you're serving. How have they been responding to the pandemic? Are there any things that you've noticed that would be helpful in our understanding of what it's like to be surviving with a severe mental illness in these times?
I think it runs the gamut. I think it's really, and some people are taking it in stride. Some people see it as relief and a break from having to face the social challenges they do on a day-to-day basis. It's really unfortunate. One person that's involved in our jobs program has taken the COVID shutdown as another personal affront and evidence that the world doesn't give a shit about him and wants to keep him down, and really can't see beyond that narrative, that this is a personal attack on him and his rights and freedom. And he's gotten quite angry at us for not being able to give him another option. He's stuck in a housing facility in a shelter, basically. And it's hard for him to see sort of the bigger picture. I think that's a very intense psychiatric reaction to what's going on. And understandable. He's had enormous challenges that are not under his control limit his options and shut him down. And this is just one more of those. So,
Thank you.
Stephen.
Unmute.
Thank you. Dave, it's the other Stephen. I have a
Thanks,
question,
Stephen.
which is just more about you personally. I mean, you're working with a very vulnerable population at the best of times, but one that's certainly at risk, I think,
Yeah.
from infection right now. How have you dealt with that in terms of you putting yourself in that space, you know, day in, day out? Have you had to take extra protection? I mean, obviously we all know what the masks, the various PPE things and stuff that you're meant to do, but just psychologically, how have you dealt with potentially putting yourself at risk more than the rest of us, really, if you're having to, you know, do that kind of work every day of the week?
Sure. We're actually not doing the field work yet. We were just contracted in the last 2 weeks from UMH and UCLA to work with the LA Homeless Services Administration on that group service. So what we've done, which gives me a little bit of peace of mind, although it definitely makes me nervous, we hired a LVN to give us an online training about sort of safety precautions. The group that we're running is in a public space outdoors, actually, in these public parks during the daytime. So we're very conscious of sort of maintaining physical space and distance and all the sort of depersonalizing qualities of wearing a mask and coming in as an outsider and not getting that physically close to anybody. So it's still to come in some ways to see like what that really feels like to be back out in the field and working directly. I honestly feel just on a very personal level, and I'm not necessarily proud of this in the context of what we're talking about. The Painted Brain has been growing dramatically for the last 3.5 years since we decided to go after a nonprofit status. And it has been pushing and pushing and constantly growing. And honestly, on a personal level, I am allowing myself to take this as somewhat of a break. I've cut back a little bit of my work daily. I'm working all from home. Our team is working pretty hard, but we're not seeing this as for once, we're not in a period of growth. We're in a period of just sort of stabilization and trying to take a breather. And so on a personal level, I'm working out a lot. I'm playing music a lot. I'm eating really well and doing a lot of art on my own and with groups. And I actually had this thought that art is just a really powerful way to give yourself a present, but also give your partner a present, because you can focus on something else and not them, and they can have their life back. So my wife and I are trying to navigate a small physical space together, and we're both artists, so that's helping a lot. But yeah, thanks for your questions. It's I'm actually I'm feeling quite lazy about myself as we are in this discussion. You guys are really on the cutting edge of being out there and doing the work. So,
Dave, we have a question in the chat box.
sure, my screen is completely frozen, so I'll just have to go by audio. But
Okay,
thank you.
I'll read it to you.
Thanks.
It's from our friendly Conger. It says, I love another occasion to hear about your work with Painted Brain. So Lee was at the Pummel Gathering.
Oh, cool.
And so heard Tristan talk about his life and Painted Brain. And thanks for participating. I'm wondering how your clients register the switch from face-to-face encounters to virtual. Has it proven a barrier to engagement or as an enhancement?
Oh, it's a horrible, horrible barrier. I mean, the technology that a lot of these folks have, I mean, a lot of them have cell phones, but it's a challenge. I think that the person I was talking about that developed this very negative attitude towards us around what we can and can't provide, he had that sort of paranoid-ish quality already, but that was really offset by seeing him in person and having him come to the community center and see a lot of smiling faces and be around people. And so technology allows us to stay in touch with him, but doesn't allow us to provide the kind of love and care that he needs to see in person to know is there. So he has a lot of space to just focus on what isn't happening, what we're not providing. And just gets more and more upset about that. I think he's really kind of an outlier in some ways, but really endemic to what the challenge is. These folks are not necessarily very adept at technology, and there's a wide range. It's a wide range.
Hi, Dave,
Yeah.
I'm really curious about any community-based art projects that you foresee in the future that may be co-created as a result of the last little while.
That's a lovely question. I don't know that we have a lot on the books. We actually, sadly, we're going to have an art opening the night that we closed on the 13th of March. We had just set up a show for 2 women artists who are part of our community. And we were about to open that night and decided that it wouldn't be, wise to bring people together. And that was 2 days before the whole city closed down. I think that a lot of the project we're working on right now is working with the community we are in touch with on creating some visual opportunities for people to do coloring and drawing. So we're actually trying to create a couple of coloring books, incorporating the work of folks that are in touch with us that are stuck at their various housing sites. But I wouldn't say we're doing anything on a mass scale at this point.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, though.
And
Oh, sorry, Kathy. This is Ian too. Noticing that we're going to run out a little bit of time, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance too to kind of get to reflect a little bit on what this last hour has kind of contributed to. We've had these 3 really great examples. But Kathy, if you had a question, great.
I was just going to say that if people go to the Painted Brain website, those coloring books are available for purchase.
We have 1 up, and we have 2 more in the works. Thanks.
So any other thoughts, any other comments for any of our guests?
Well, I found this really enlightening. It's really a pleasure to listen to some of the other projects going on in the world and here in LA. Thanks everyone for being here and being together.
Thanks, Dave. And Stephen and Charnel. Ian, did you have any questions for these 3?
Thanks for asking. I was getting kind of this theme that was starting to come to me a little bit. I mean, some of these words really jumped out about kind of hope in the human spirit, kind of Stephen with your work. And then Charnel, you had this beautiful way of saying we're all one and kind of talking about what that looks like in your working experience. And then Dave, I really like this too, about communities, creating communities. So more just thankful for kind of seeing a little bit of a thread for me that's really heartening, I think, during this time. So guess, does anyone else have any words or things that are kind of coming up to mind here at the end of our time?
Can I contribute a little on the theme of community? No one can survive without a community. We are all the beneficiaries of it or struggle with the absence of it. And it's the only way that we'll get through this, I think, as a human population, is in learning to live as communities that offer care to one another. And when you see it up close and personal with Stephen's work at the centre, it is so impactful to have a community that can put these things up, can do things. And it's great to look after your neighbours and have people, leaning over the fence and saying, do you need anything? That's very important, and it's an important kind of community. But I was thinking about Charnel's stories about Aboriginal people in Canada and their immediate families being so much bigger than I, as an immigrant to this country, have access to. I was just thinking what a very powerful resource that was. It's kind of inspiring to me. I can only hope that those who are isolated, as you say, not everyone has internet contact or even a cell phone service, but the fact that you and others are working in that community makes me feel hopeful about what's happening with the pandemic. because I suspect this is happening everywhere. We don't know enough about it to be sure, but it strikes me that it's happening here and these people gathered on this call, you know, it really should be happening everywhere. I hope it is. But thank you for everyone for sharing.
Thank you.